Hey, you guys, gals, and bums, and welcome back to A Few Bad Men. All right, today we're going to be talking about Nudie Mims, one of the most brutal enforcers the streets of Philadelphia have ever seen. His vicious acts helped lay the foundation of terror that would enable the Philadelphia Black Mafia to control illegal activity in the black community in the 1970s and 80s. For almost 30 years, Nudy embodied the get down or lay down mentality that made the men of the Philly Black Mafia and later the Junior Black Mafia the most dangerous men in the city. Robert Mims was born on April 28, 1943 in Aiken County, South Carolina. As a youth, his family moved to Philadelphia and settled on Dakota Street near 9th in North Philadelphia. Not much is known about his family or his upbringing, but by the time he was a teenager, he was already becoming a menace in the neighborhood. Nudy was big for his age, eventually growing to 6'4", 220 pounds. He towered over most of his peers and enjoyed hurting people, so he quickly fell into the bully role. Nudy hit the streets early, and he had his first brush with the law when he was only 12 years old. He was one of those badass little kids running around the streets of North Philadelphia. By the age of 15, Nudy was already a violent criminal with no compassion for those he victimized. At 11 p.m. on October 20th, 1958, an 87-year-old half-blind man named George Davenport was walking down Germantown Avenue near Cumberland Street when he was approached by four young men. Out of nowhere, one of them sucker-punched the old man, knocking him to the ground. While on the ground, all four began to kick the man and yanking at his pockets looking for money. A police officer named John Linzadell appeared, and the four ran off. The officer gave chase, and after 3 blocks, he apprehended 17-year-old Thomas Goodman. Goodman was taken to the station, and a few hours later, 18-year-old Willie Green, 16-year-old Leroy Jackson, and 15-year-old Robert Mims were arrested at their homes. George Davenport will be taken to the hospital with his jaw broken in several places, a fractured skull, and $6 still in his pocket. He would pass away 3 days later from his injuries. Willie Green would be found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison at 20 years old. Nudy would be tried as a juvenile and would be sent to the Juvenile Correctional Facility for 2 years. The Philadelphia Juvenile Correctional Facility was similar to New York's Elmira Reformatory. It was a school for would-be criminals. Upon his release, Nudy didn't hesitate to put into practice the things he learned on the inside, and soon he got back to his violent ways. The now 6'4", 200-plus pound Nudy was no doubt an intimidating sight on a dark night. In late 1960, Nudy was arrested for beating 2 pedestrians and assaulting a woman. On January 12, 1961, he would be found guilty and sentenced to White Hill Industrial School until he turned 21. After his sentencing, Nudy was placed in the bullpen along with 30 other youths while he waited to be transferred. While he waited, Nudy began to argue with Sheriffs George Hubbard and Julius Perry. Others joined in, and soon a riot broke out. The officers fended off the prisoners, one armed with a chair, the other with a blackjack, until help arrived. It took 6 deputies to subdue Nudy, who kept yelling, "No one's going to lay a hand on me." By 1969, Nudy was back on the streets, and he got married to a woman named Emma Whitfield. By now, he was already running with a group of hardened killers led by Sam Christian and Ron Harvey. They were known as the Philly Black Mafia. Nudy was a high-ranking member, one of the group's founders, top enforcers, and was known by the police as a dangerous man. At 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday, April 2nd, 1969, Nudy was on the corner of Germantown and Lehigh Avenues when a cop stopped him and began to question him about an assault that took place earlier. The cop told Nudy to get against the wall. He refused, and a scuffle broke out. Soon the crowd gathered, and while he was trying to get Nudy in the police car, someone from the crowd struck the officer in the back of the head with an object. Nudy broke free, punched Officer Forrester in the face, and took off running. The cop radioed for assistance, hopped in his car, and gave chase. He caught up with Nudy a few blocks away and placed him against the wall, but the much bigger Nudy overpowered the officer and again broke free. This time, Officer Forrester pulled his service revolver and shots rang out. Forrester fired 1 bullet. It whizzed past Nudy's head and struck 23-year-old Catherine Hood, who was standing across the street in the lower leg. Nudy would be captured by responding officers, taken to the station, and charged with assault. Catherine Hood was taken to the hospital and treated for her leg wound. I'm not sure what came of this, if he did any time or not. Whatever happened, I do know that he was on the streets in January 1971. In the early 70s, the Philly Black Mafia was becoming a major power in the Philadelphia underworld. They were gaining a reputation as being ruthless and excessively violent, and they used tactics not only to punish those who defied them, but as a warning to others of what happens to those who chose to buck the new system. The gang was expanding from extorting pimps, pushers, and gamblers to extorting legitimate businesses, and not just black-owned ones. The Dubrow's furniture store at 419 South Street had been open for 50 years, and they had never been robbed. The South Street of 1971 was not the South Street of today. That South Street was where the dope addicts, hustlers, and streetwalkers played, but no one bothered Dubrows. Sometime in 1973, Alan Dubrow, the owner, was approached by members of the Philly Black Mafia, and he was told that South Street was a very dangerous place. You never know what could happen to a nice business like this. Lucky for you, we're here to offer you our protection. The owner was no fool. He knew a shakedown when he saw one, and he declined the offer. At 2 p.m. on January 5th, 1971, Nudy and another man entered Dubrow's and asked to speak to salesman Morton Grossman. When they were told that Grossman was at lunch, they asked to see some rugs, and salesman Max Corson took them to the rug display. At the same time, 3 more men came in and asked to see some furniture. Moments later, 3 or 4 more men came in and fanned out. Some went upstairs, and some went to the offices in the rear. When the signal was given, the men pulled guns, announced the robbery, and began to herd the 22 employees and 2 customers into a back room. One salesman was on the phone when one of the gunmen put a gun to his face and said, "Don't say anything, I'll take the phone." He took the phone and politely told the person on the other end, "We'll call you back in a few minutes," and hung up. Morton Grossman returned from his lunch break ready to get back to work. He asked one of the robbers if he needed assistance, and a gun was shoved into his face and he was taken to the back with the rest. The hostages were hogtied with electrical wire and piled on top of each other. When the elevator reached the 3rd floor, the doors opened and handyman Alton Barker and Dardis Burney were met by Edward Strusnick and his .38. They tried to escape. Strusnick yelled, hold it," before shots rang out. 5 shots at point-blank range struck both Barker and Burney. Barker was shot right under the heart, and Burney was shot in the right arm and left hand. The gangsters then hogtied the 2 wounded men and rode the elevator down to the 1st floor. "Where's the key to the back door?" one of the men asked Burney. "It's in my back pocket," he said. The man ripped his pocket, took the key, and opened the door leading to the back alley. There they retrieved a 5-gallon can of gasoline stashed there before the robbery. Once inside, they began to spread the gasoline all over the furniture, rugs, and the offices. They piled papers from the filing cabinets onto the hard-fire employees and doused them with gas too. Then, they flipped the lit match onto the legs of Robert Porecker. On the way out, one of the men stood over the prone Morton Grossman, and shots rang out. One bullet passed through Morris Grossman's bound hand and lodged in his stomach. The other one went straight through his right buttock. Robert Porecker's legs would be burned, but he was able to extinguish the fire and get free. He helped the others get free, and they all escaped. Alton Barker was taken to the hospital, but he died minutes after arriving. Morton Grossman would eventually make a full recovery. When the police and fire department showed up, some of the officers recognized Sam Christian standing amongst the crowd, watching the whole thing unfold. After all that, only a small amount of petty cash was taken. The police interviewed the survivors, and based on the description, the cops knew it was Nudy. When witnesses were shown photos, they identified him and an arrest warrant was issued for him. Nudy was now looking to get out of town, but you can't go on a lam if you got no dough. On February 24th, 1971, Nudy was with John Clark and several other Black Mafia members in Exton, PA. They were there to relieve the Southeastern National Bank of some of its money. With 2 of them dressed as businessmen, Clark dressed as a police officer, and one dressed as a priest. Now, I don't know if this was Nudy dressed as a priest, but it would have been a sight to see a black 6'5" priest waving a pistol robbing the bank. Anyway, the men entered the bank separately and fanned out. When the signal was given, they all pulled guns, announced the robbery, and ordered everyone into the vault. They took $8,500 and made a clean getaway. But not really. The Southeastern National Bank had been robbed before and had recently installed cameras. The cameras captured the whole thing. The police had high-quality photos of all the robbers, including Nudie Mims. Nudy and John Clark went on a lam to Chicago when Nudy became a bodyguard to black Muslim leader Elijah Muhammad. When John Clark landed back in Philly a few weeks later, the cops were waiting for him. He was arrested, and with no witnesses to intimidate, just their faces on security cameras, he would be found guilty along with several other members. Nudy was still in the Windy City, and another arrest warrant was issued for him. While Nudy was in Chicago, he used several aliases and was arrested several times, but never held on anything serious. In 1973, the police in Chicago found out that Robert Green was really the wanted fugitive Robert Mims from Philadelphia, and he was arrested. He was in a car rented under the name Robert Green. It had multiple pieces of ID with the name Robert Green, but fingerprints don't lie. Nudy was extradited back to Philadelphia. He was charged with the Southeastern Bank robbery and given $150,000 bail, which he paid and was released. While out on bail, he turned himself in for the Dubrows holdup and murder. He was charged with being part of the robbery and was given another bail, which he paid and was released. Edward Sistrunk and Robert Bolter had already been found guilty. Bolter for taking part in the robbery and Sistrunk for the shooting and murder of Alton Barker. Nudy would be found guilty for his role in 1975, and he was sentenced to life in prison. In 1976, he was awarded a new trial and was let out on bail. Former Dubrow's employee, Louis Grubby, had been a key witness in the trial of Nudy, Sistrook, and Bolton. With a new trial date set, he was again being called on to take the stand against Nudy. On January 26, 1976, Louis Grubby and his wife Yetta were found dead in the living room of their home in Northeast Philadelphia. 67-year-old Louis had been shot once in the left temple and once in the left side of his neck. And 63-year-old Yetta had been shot once behind the right ear. Both were shot by the same .38 caliber handgun. Police found no signs of a struggle or break-in and could not tie the murders to the Dubrow's case. Even though the star witness was eliminated, Nudy was found guilty again and sentenced to life again. He would get another chance in 1981. He was again given another trial and released on $300,000 bail. But on May 13, 1981, a week before his trial, police raided Nudy's home. Nudy was arrested in his home in the 9600 block of Ashton Road in Northeast Philadelphia. Police found 2 ounces of sniffing powder, a Thompson submachine gun, and a Uzi. He would be sent back to jail and again found guilty for the Dubrow's robbery and sentenced to life in prison. In 1984, even though he was incarcerated, the FBI said that Nudy was running a dope ring from his cell in the Greatersford prison. It was part of a larger network of Black Mafia inmates throughout the Pennsylvania penal system that had a monopoly on drug sales inside and outside of the prison. According to a 1988 Crime Commission report, Nudy, along with Michael Youngblood and James Madison, co-founded the newest version of the Philly Black Mafia. They would be known as the JBM, or the Junior Black Mafia. And the man who ran the show in the streets was a man named Aaron Jones. But that's for another story. Nudy became an advisor to the young JBM. In prison, Nudy had become more powerful than ever. In Greatersford, he became the prison imam, an Islamic chaplain, I guess you could say. This gave him control over the 1,800 Muslims imprisoned at Greatersford at the time. But in all reality, Nudy used this position to run the prison like a crime boss. He had his own office and phone, which allowed him to orchestrate a heroin ring based in Northeast Philly and other criminal activity from inside the prison. When the warden wanted to move 100 men to another cell block, the men refused to move. They just stood outside their cells. The warden sent for Nudy. When Nudy arrived, he waved his hand, and it was all done. Then he walked over to the warden and told him, "I move them when I need to move them," and returned to his office. He allegedly arranged for prostitutes to be brought into the prison under religious pretenses, and while services were going on in one room, a brothel was being run in another. On October 25, 1995, more than 650 state troopers conducted a raid on Greaterford State Prison. Prisoners were strip searched and cells were turned upside down. They found over 200 weapons, 55 packages of cocaine, 122 assorted pills, and 6 packages of marijuana. Nudy and 11 other prison leaders were removed from the prison. Nudy was taken to a prison in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, before being transferred to a prison in Minnesota. On July 9, 2012, Robert Nudy Mims died in the Minnesota Correctional Facility, Faribault. He was 69 years old. And that, my friends, is the skinny on Robert Nudy Mims of the Philadelphia Black Mafia. I hope you enjoyed the story as much as I enjoyed telling it. I hope you learned some things about Nudy you didn't know. If you didn't know about Nudy, I'm glad I could introduce you to a new gangster. All right, so by now you know the drill. Bump off that subscribe button, break that thumb, ring that bell, set it for all notifications so you don't miss nothing. If you want to slide an envelope up the stairs to the boss, the PayPal link is below. If you want to get early access to the videos and uncut videos that I can't show you on YouTube, you got to subscribe to the Patreon channel or the YouTube membership. All right. I wasn't even supposed to do this video this week. I was supposed to do something else, but one of the websites I use for resources got hacked. So it put me back a little bit. So I had to switch in mid-story to this one. So look out for that next video. I can't wait to get it to you. It's an exciting story and it's something different. All right. So listen, this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see you in the funnies.